History teaches that civilization's endurance in arid lands is not measured by military strength, but by hydrological wisdom. Across millennia, the political stability of the Persian plateau relied on a simple, painful truth: water is finite, and its use must be conservative. When political ambition overrides ecological reality, the system inevitably enters a spiral of debt, paid not in currency, but in disappearing land and dying rivers. For decades, the Islamic Republic of Iran pursued a singular vision of industrial might and food independence, attempting to engineer away the constraints of its own geography. This pursuit required the systematic destruction of ancient restraints and the reckless depletion of the nation's deepest reserves. Today, Iran faces a resource emergency that is both geological and political. The crisis is not merely a shortage caused by drought, it is a structural collapse accelerated by decades of self-serving policy choices. The consequences are now measurable, not just in empty reservoirs, but in the sinking ground beneath its major cities. This is the story of how a sophisticated, naturally arid state chose a path of destructive self-sufficiency, transforming a climate challenge into an existential governance failure. The pre-modern stability of Iran was maintained by the qanat, millennia-old subterranean aqueducts that harnessed gravity to draw water slowly and sustainably from mountain sources. This system was decentralized, community-managed, and inherently conservative, imposing natural limits on expansion. This stability first began to fray in the 1960s. Inspired by Western megaprojects like the Hoover Dam, the Pahlavi regime sought rapid modernization. Land reforms dismantled traditional agricultural estates, empowering smaller farmers who were encouraged to adopt motorized deep well drilling. The incentive structure shifted entirely. Deep wells provided higher, faster yields than qanats, allowing for industrialized agriculture necessary to feed a rapidly expanding population. The ancient, sustainable limits were abandoned for immediate economic gain. Following the 1979 revolution, this extraction accelerated dramatically. Amidst the 8-year war with Iran, the new Islamic Republic adopted a policy of radical self-sufficiency, or jihad-e-sazandegi. Food sovereignty became a strategic imperative, driving an unregulated, massive expansion of dams and wells across the country, regardless of ecological cost. This decision created an enormous and ongoing structural contradiction. Nearly 92% of Iran's total usable water was now being allocated to agriculture, a sector generating only about 13% of the nation's GDP. The country was sacrificing its most vital resource for minimal economic gain, cementing a fundamentally irrational policy.
The policy of self-sufficiency provided a fertile ground for a new power structure to emerge. After the Iran-Iraq War concluded in 1988, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, pivoted its focus from combat to reconstruction. Under the umbrella of affiliated firms, most notably Khatam al-Anbiya, the IRGC began to monopolize lucrative state infrastructure projects. This structure, often referred to by critics as the water mafia, was not merely corrupt, it was an institutional failure. Operating in a closed loop with government consultancies and ministries, these firms received no-bid contracts for monumental dam and water transfer projects, bypassing critical environmental assessments and local input. The IRGC, therefore, became both the primary architect of the system and a protected beneficiary of its instability. The number of large dams in Iran doubled in just 6 years in the early 2010s. This rapid, opaque expansion was justified under the strategic defense of the nation. Crucially, the IRGC's associated industrial enterprises, steel, petrochemicals, and automotive manufacturing, were themselves massive, water-intensive consumers, strategically located in the arid Central Plateau. The system was engineered to direct resources away from local communities and towards central industrial and political power centers. This self-reinforcing extractive loop guaranteed that the decisions made were governed by political and financial motives, not hydrological necessity.
The system's failures first manifested as catastrophic environmental disasters. Lake Urmia, once the largest lake in the Middle East, stands as the most visible evidence of this policy's cost. Excessive damming on its tributaries and a doubling of irrigated land around its basin since the revolution led to its near-total desiccation. What remains is a salty, dusty crust, a source of devastating dust storms that threaten public health far beyond the immediate region. The Ghotvand Dam, completed in 2011 on the vital Karun River in Khuzestan, was another landmark failure. Despite explicit warnings, the reservoir was built on a layer of salt rock. Once filled, the leaching salt increased the river's salinity by 35%, crippling downstream agriculture and disproportionately impacting Arab minority communities. In the Central Plateau, the Zayanderud River, the historic lifeblood of Isfahan, began running dry entirely. Its water had been systematically diverted to fuel the explosive growth of cities and high-value industries like steel production in arid Yazd. This divergence of resources solidified ethnic tensions, with minority populations accusing the Persian-dominated center of prioritizing its own industry over regional habitability. These were not isolated accidents. They were the predictable, systemic consequences of treating water not as a life support system, but as a strategic commodity to be transferred and manipulated for centralized power. While rivers and lakes collapsed above ground, a more insidious disaster unfolded beneath the surface: land subsidence. Iran, ranking 5th globally for groundwater depletion, extracts its non-renewable fossil aquifers at an unsustainable rate, approximately 3.8 cubic kilometers annually. As these subterranean reserves are emptied, the earth above begins to compact and sink. This is not a slow process. In many regions, the land is subsiding at rates exponentially higher than the global critical threshold. Around Tehran and Isfahan, the ground is sinking by centimeters every year. This structural failure is perhaps the clearest definition of an existential crisis. Key infrastructure in major urban centers is now at high risk of collapse. In Isfahan, detailed assessments list hospitals, metro stations, and historic mosques as threatened by the shifting foundations created by chronic overextraction. Subsidence is the inevitable price of using non-renewable water to sustain water-intensive industry and agriculture in arid zones. It is a slow-motion geological judgment on reckless resource management. The structural integrity of the very cities the regime prioritized for development is now compromised by the policies intended to secure them. The internal crisis soon spilled across Iran's borders, weaponizing water as a geopolitical tool. The transboundary relationship with Afghanistan, particularly over the Helmand River, which feeds Iran's Sistan and Baluchistan province, reached a critical confrontation following the Taliban's return to power in 2021. The 1973 Helmand River Treaty guaranteed Iran an annual flow. Yet the Taliban accelerated construction of dams, including the Kamal Khan Dam, significantly choking the flow into Iran. The response from Tehran was immediate and aggressive. Instead of relying solely on diplomatic channels, Iran launched a massive, forceful deportation campaign, expelling millions of Afghan migrants and refugees. Observers recognized this not only as a humanitarian disaster, but as a calculated act of state pressure. By forcibly removing millions of people, Iran attempted to reduce the domestic population requiring water resources and simultaneously leverage the migrant crisis to pressure the Taliban government into honoring the water rights agreement. This action highlights the regime's preferred solution to systemic resource scarcity, shifting the burden externally, leveraging population movement and coercion, rather than enacting the politically painful internal reforms necessary to secure the nation's future. The current phase of the crisis is defined by a deep institutional paralysis.
When partial sanction relief arrived in 2015, the regime had an opportunity to invest in efficiency reforms, upgrading leaking municipal infrastructure, adopting modern irrigation technology, and conserving aquifers. Instead, capital was directed back toward the same self-enriching dam and transfer projects favored by the entrenched IRGC establishment. The contradiction is now inescapable. The central power structure cannot survive without the water-intensive heavy industries it has fostered, yet these industries guarantee the ecological destruction of the land they occupy. The crisis has reached such a pitch that senior political figures publicly floated the concept of moving the capital city from Tehran, acknowledging its ecological unsustainability. But the underlying challenge remains political, not technical. Reform requires eliminating subsidies for water-intensive crops, regulating the powerful industrial enterprises, and breaking the economic power of the water mafia. Such decisions directly challenge the financial and political security of the current ruling elite. The pattern persists. Constraints are ignored. Power is prioritized over survival. The severe drought of the 2020s has simply brought forward a collapse engineered over 40 years. Until the political economy of water shifts, the Iranian plateau will continue to choose expansion and extraction, guaranteeing further instability in a cycle that began the moment necessity was traded for political will.